but a very warm welcome to all of you that are already with us. Welcome to Wizards, Muggle, Crust and the Human Purpose of Business. I'm Jonathan Evans, Associate Vicar for Heartedge and at St Martin in the Fields. And this session is part of what we call Living God's Future Now, the online festival of theology, ideas and practice from Heartedge. We'll say more about Heartedge at the end of the session, and my colleague Ben Sheridan will also post information in the chat as we go through. We do want to encourage you to start posting any questions or comments that you have in the chat too, as soon as they occur to you. So at any point during the conversation, please do post comments and questions in the chat. We'll be picking those up later in the session for discussion with our panel, and I'll be looking out for those as they appear in the chat so that we can take them pretty much as they come and as you share them. And also feel free to use the chat to discuss and share amongst yourselves. We are recording the first half of this session, so we would ask you to mute your microphones unless you're invited to speak, as that minimizes background noise and affects the quality of the recording. Having said those few things by way of notices, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Douglas Board. Douglas is a leadership and career coach and a senior visiting fellow at the Business School, formerly CAS, at City University of London. Douglas grew up in Hong Kong and worked for the UK Treasury, and then has worked as a headhunter. He was also closely involved as treasurer at St Martin in the Fields in the decisions, controversies and commercial struggles which attended the church becoming directly engaged itself in commerce during the 1990s. He is, as I'm sure you're all aware, the author of Elite, Can You Rise to the Top Without Losing Your Soul, the book on which tonight's discussion is based. We are very grateful to Douglas for his innovative book, for initiating tonight's conversation, and for all the guests that he has invited. I'm looking forward to all that will be discussed, and I'm now going to hand over to Douglas to introduce the session more generally and to introduce to us his guests. Douglas, over to you. Thank you so much.
Jonathan, and all your colleagues at Heartedge, I really thank you from the bottom of my heart for the opportunity to do this. I thank everyone who's giving up their time on this sunny evening, at least in the southern UK, to join us. Thank you very much indeed. And I am truly blessed and grateful to my panelists who have come along, and the invitation to them will not just be to talk about my book, but really to bring us from their very wide experience what excites them or concerns them about the human purpose of business. So just briefly to introduce, let me start with David Grayson. David is everything. I mean, he's a panel in a person. He's an international thought leader on responsible business. He is chair of the Institute of Business Ethics, but he hasn't just kind of taught at Cranfield on that. He began in business his early pioneering work in creating public, private and community partnerships in areas such as youth enterprise and disability rights. Disability is another area where he's provided a lot of leadership, and he's chair designate of the international pan-disability charity Leonard Cheshire, and he addresses disability issues with the benefit of personal experience. We are absolutely thrilled that, David, that you're one of our panelists. Manisha Shah has a deep commercial background in media, in digital, in international. When BBC Worldwide was the name for the BBC's commercial distribution arm, whose sales grew to exceed £1 billion a year, she had a role as Director of Emerging Markets for that. And she has an MBA from London Business School, which apparently is a business school in London, though I'm sure not as good as the one that I'm honoured to be associated with. That hasn't stopped her, though, from going on to be a leader in arts and culture and to have a regulatory role on Ofcom's content board and to be a passionate chair of the Rose Bruford Theatre and College. And I'm just thrilled because I know she's been struggling with a bit of a migraine, Manisha, that you're very much with us, and I look forward hugely to what you're going to say. Sam Wells is not just my vicar here at St. Martin's. He is an international theologian and has published 35 books. And one of the things that he's taught us to do, and his books are brilliant, and one of them very much influenced my own book, Elites. It's a book called the Nazareth Manifesto, in which Sam reflects on what we might call the ordinary life of Jesus, the 30 years that is not the extraordinary bits that make it into the Christian creeds. And that whole relationship of the ordinary and the extraordinary is at the heart of one of the things I'm going to be trying to encourage us to think about. Now, one of the things that Sam has taught us at St. Martin's to do, and you may, when I do my remarks, be keenly watching out to see if I've learned my lessons well, is to approach thinking with the phrase, I wonder. And one of the things we've been wondering only last Sunday at St. Martin's is, with Sam having already clocked up nearly 40 books, and there only being 66 books in the Bible, some of us are wondering whether, when the total of Sam's books reaches the number of books in the Bible, that might not in fact be the moment of the second coming. Jo Hill is a career regulator. She worked at the Financial Services Authority, then the Financial Conduct Authority. In an early stage, she was involved in investigating some of the problematic PPI cases that, as we know, mushroomed and grew to a situation where over 20 billion pounds of redress had to be paid by businesses in terms of customer redress. She went on to become Director of Market Intelligence, Data and Analytics at the FCA. And most recently, she's been Executive Director of Strategy and Risk at the Pensions Regulator. I should say that Jo is not just a regulator. She is also a secret entrepreneur. And in just a few days, launches on Instagram her own business called Pausebox, which she might tell you about. Thank you very much, Jo. And Jo is also a passionate advocate around mental health issues and serves on a number of boards in relation to that. I have to give apologies from Richard Gould, deep personal apologies that he's not able to join us. He warned me earlier in the week that might be the case. I thank him for his willingness to join in, but we'll do our best without him. I want, in 15 minutes, to say something about my new book, Elites, Can You Rise to the Top Without Losing Your Soul? And based on it, to propose a new idea about the human purpose of business. Then each of my guests will take 5 minutes to put forward their view. We'll develop that subject in a conversation, first among the panel, and then with Jonathan putting points from you. So please use the chat for your views and questions, which are most welcome. Many of you are leaders and innovative thinkers in your own right. I know in Canada, America, South Africa, and Europe joining us this evening. In 1915, William Ely Hill drew a famous cartoon which, depending how you look at it, shows a young woman with a party hat looking away, or an older woman in a shawl looking down. You can find it by Googling ambiguous image. It's a bit magic, isn't it? I mean, at one moment, it's obvious that the figure is in her early 20s, and then suddenly it's obvious that she's in her 80s. Yet nothing has changed. The black marks haven't moved. Of course, like every human magic trick, there is no magic involved at all once we grasp the explanation. And that's why in my book Elites, I use the term wizards for those with the topmost positions of power and prestige in any given activity, be it running a company or your local golf club. There is no magic at all in the explanation I give. In fact, I draw on sociological research from a small English town in the 1950s with no power or prestige in sight. But what needs explaining is quite a trick. Why, so I claim, all of us end up giving elites more respect than they deserve, at the expense of our own happiness and sense of choice in our lives. My story particularly affects a group of hidden heroes who I have had the deep privilege of coming to understand through being a coach. This is the group of non-wizards, muggles therefore, who do really serious managerial, leadership and professional jobs in the dangerous borderlands of wizard territory. They deal with wizards every day. They see them close up. They try to make wizards' plans work. Often they succeed, but they don't get offered a place at the top table, and often they burn out. It's the burning out which makes me call this group the Muggle Crust. If you are one, ahead of anyone else, I wrote elites for you. So much for wizards in the Muggle Crust. Now let me ask, so is elites about highly paid suits? Let me borrow Hill's cartoon again. Yes, it is, and no, it isn't. Part 1 of the book is called The Senior Executive Survival Guide, but part 2 of the book is called Big Questions. The biggest question I ask is, why does the wizard muggle pattern, which by the way is also called the glass ceiling, exist? And partly through the intervention of some women construction workers in Mumbai, who 15 years ago knocked me off my well-paid headhunter perch to go exploring, and partly through a brilliant doctoral program at the University of Hertfordshire, I find the answer to be that the secret of elites is very ordinary and involves us all. Let's look at the black dots of our working lives again. There is more to see than we realized. On the cover of Elites is a pint of milk with a layer of cream which has risen to the top. To take from just some of the emails people have generously taken the trouble to send me in the past month, from stand-up comics, musicians, priests and estate agents. It's a book about more than highly paid suits. Here's Elite's answer to the big question. We need to reframe our understanding of how the ordinary and the extraordinary in human affairs relate to each other. In organizational and societal terms, the ordinariness of our extraordinary achievers and the extraordinariness of our so-called ordinary achievers needs to be held much closer together and in interdependent balance. And it is that insight which I want to apply to the human purpose of business. We're only slowly emerging from the era in which the purpose of business was, to the exclusion of all else, making shareholders as rich as possible. Maximizing shareholder value was not a voluntary religion. Executives who tried to do anything else, who resisted, for example, saddling their businesses with as much debt as possible, so that shareholders could put as little as possible down while still enjoying all the profits, were letting society down. And via the capital markets, those wrong-thinking executives would find themselves out of a job, their business bought from under them. The only businesses which survived with a different purpose were those with strong intent and protected from a stock market coup, such as the John Lewis Partnership, whose business purpose was and is the happiness of its partners. And this week, we might add a point about the ownership of football clubs. This era of, let me call it, the capitalist inquisition, was neither a law of the universe nor an accident. In his critical history of American business schools, Professor Rakesh Khurana at Harvard has laid out how, at the beginning of the last century, the founders of business schools thought they were laying the foundations for a new profession, business administration, modeled on medicine and the law. Professions can go wrong. but in concept, they are concerned with contributing to individual and social good. But after the Second World War, an idealization of science to the exclusion of other kinds of human reasoning, backed by conscious, ideological endowment strategies adopted by wealthy foundations, brought us the capitalist inquisition. Now think again about Boris Johnson's remark of 1 month ago, when he said, "Greed, my friends, was the secret of the UK's relative vaccine success." He wants us to believe that business must and should function as an uncontrollable natural urge, because then we might think we can do nothing about it. Perhaps he thinks that way about his own sex drive. But in truth, he has choices, and so do we. He just doesn't want us to choose. He wants us to roll over and think of England. What the purpose of business will be in the next couple of decades is down to us, and the question could not be more urgent. Because our time on this planet is short, and because the only thing which produces global change faster than business is a virus. One alternative view, with roots in Marx and in the churches and elsewhere, is that the purpose of business should be to produce good jobs. And with the explosion of low-paid, precarious and gig work, and the relentless disappearance of once apparently secure occupations, this must be part of our conversation, certainly at a governmental level, setting regulatory frameworks and long-term strategies. But I don't see more jobs for their own sake, even good jobs, as the purpose of business. A business is not a job factory. Even the John Lewis Partnership doesn't have the goal of employing as many partners as possible. A competing view is that businesses exist to create customer delight. Customer delight deserves constant business attention. But I don't find the idea workable as the purpose of business with a capital P. What about needs which customers don't know they have today, but thanks to business innovation, may be happy delightedly to crave tomorrow? Does it matter whether that new need is the ability to walk everywhere listening to your own music, or to play a new kind of gambling game? Or take Facebook. Believe me, it creates customer delight. Who are its customers? Not you and I. We're its exploitable resources. Facebook's customers are the advertisers who pay for its services, including many corporations and Vladimir Putin. Is a grinning Putin the purpose of business? Prompted by the reframing of the ordinary and the extraordinary proposed by elites, I wonder whether the human purpose of business might be to create places for which also read organizations, systems, and communities of extraordinary achievement in which ordinary lives matter. Lives includes everyone affected by the business. It includes pensioners waiting for dividend checks, apprentices looking to develop skills, as well as the 8-year-old cycling along a pavement next to an idling car engine. Extraordinary welcomes ambition, aspiration, and innovation, and the many other ingredients needed for outstanding achievement. It recognizes business as a vital source of value and creativity, as well as a source of problems. The phrase "ordinary lives matter" automatically takes us away from rules and codes towards conversations which change over time and which are not limited to the expert and the powerful. Ordinary lives only matter if they are part of the conversation. Those conversations won't start with a blank screen. If pay, working conditions, or health and safety are exploitative, ordinary lives don't matter. If employees, customers, and users with no special clout aren't listened to when they raise serious concerns, ordinary lives don't matter. If when things go seriously wrong, investigations are brushed aside, ordinary lives don't matter. But the bar is set higher than that. Many businesses will say ordinary lives matter because we constantly celebrate our frontline colleagues, salesperson or customer service assistant of the month, for example. I applaud that, but the bar is higher, especially recognizing colleagues who outperform on your targets or values is bigging yourself up, amplifying how you see the world. Instead, let's ask a range of your senior leaders. When was the last time that you changed your mind or learned something unexpected from a conversation with an ordinary colleague, an ordinary customer, or a meeting with a small-scale stakeholder group? That could be evidence of ordinary lives mattering. And when in the future we ask, should robots be allowed to do X? Why not start by reflecting, would this enable an extraordinary achievement in a way in which ordinary human lives matter? May the human purpose of business be to create places, organizations, systems, communities of extraordinary achievement in which ordinary lives matter. This formula is not the sole answer to a giant question, but it could be a useful contribution to discussion. Before I turn over now to my guests, one last word from my faith perspective, which is Christian. The Bible reveals God as a creator whose business appears to include creating a place, our universe, of extraordinary possibility and achievement, in which, so God insists, ordinary lives matter. So our business could be God's business. Thank you for listening to me. I would like to hand over to ask Joe to give us, what do you think about the human purpose of business?
Thank you, Douglas. Quite how to follow you, that is a good question. And I remember when we first started talking about this, you said to me, what I really would like our guests to hear is a little about the journey into leadership and what leadership means for you. And that's really what I've kind of popped my 5 minutes around. So you unmasked me as regulated to secret entrepreneur, and there are things that that link those. And what are the things that link them as far as I see it? Well, for me, the best businesses are ones that are there to serve humans and allow humans to thrive, both in the work that they do and the products that they offer and the way in which they work. But as you have already pointed out, capitalism brings about some uncontrollable urges, and that is the purpose and the business of regulation. And it would be fair to say that I tripped into the role of regulation pretty naively and princess-like, looking around me and thinking, I just need to pop my cape on to save the day. But also I've got a fairly fierce philosophy that links through all that I do, which is that about leadership. And someone really needs to look after the little guy. Someone needs to be out there making sure that we are all given an open and even choice at things, and we've all got that best shot at doing things. And that really was what drove me towards regulation. I became an accidental leader. I am, if you read your book, Douglas, the classic Muggle done good. I crept my way through being a Muggle, driven by parental narratives of, if you would like ham in your sandwiches rather than jam, you need to work hard and the rewards will come. But then things started to change a little, and that's where the world becomes slightly more cloudy and more misty as you get closer to the top of the mountain. In the depths of my days, identifying PPI mis-selling and popping on my cape to fight the injustices of PPI mis-selling. If you'd asked me if I was going to become a senior leader in an organisation, my answer would have been, no, of course not. I'm not one of them. How does that happen? But somehow it did. Sponsorship was key to move through that journey and to have people pushing me to become something that I couldn't envisage that I could become. But what always stuck with me was I would take on the impossible tasks, and I had many very senior colleagues who said to me, why will you continue to take on the impossible? And one very good friend now, who at the time was on the Exco, said to me, why is it that you always step in front of the moving bus? And I guess it was, for me, it's driven by this, as I say, fierce philosophy that somebody has to look out for the little guy. Somebody has to try and correct the things that are wrong in the world. So if there's a difficult challenge out there, someone needs to be brave enough to put their hand up and to answer that challenge. But as I moved through my career and into more extensive leadership roles, as I say, it got a little more misty up there. And I was lucky enough to meet you, Douglas, and to be introduced to some of your wisdom firsthand that is in elites. Now, I think that's really where my thoughts about leadership crystallized, and where I took a few brave steps, and what I think business needs to do more of, which is, I had until that time hidden my struggles with mental health issues and never really talked about them, and always seen them as a barrier to my leadership and my own leadership style. And what I learned when I took the brave leap of talking about that very publicly is actually that gains followers and that makes you human. And for me, leadership absolutely has to be authentic, and business has to be authentic. And we have to recognize that if we're truly going to serve the people of our nations, then we have to be authentic in the way that we do that and show that we can be vulnerable as leaders. And so I think the purpose of business is to serve people equally, to give opportunities equally, and to make sure where you have more than others that you are looking out for how you can redistribute things more evenly amongst them. The most important leadership lesson for me is being authentic. You're privileged to be a leader, and you're only left in that position by your followership. And so in order to gain followers, they have to really understand who you are, and you have to really understand who they are. So for me, I think we've got a great opportunity brought about by the pandemic, and I'm not sure many people talk about it in such positive terms. The playing field has been leveled. We have all been forced to work from home, to work differently, to do things that we previously conceived to be impossible. And we've made it through. Perhaps not in the way that we wanted to, but we've made it through. And as we re-emerge and get back into the office spaces and get back into business, I think this is the time when really we can start to implement some of those lessons from elites and start to create a different future. My fears, because you asked for our fears, are that we go back to the way that we were. For those that choose to remain working from home, they become second-class citizens as presenteeism in the office and the opportunity in the office continues because you can be seen. And so I think there is lots of opportunity arising out of this strange situation that we have found us in, and it's our responsibility as leaders to seize that. And with that, I'm going to hand back to you, Douglas.
And then I'm going to ask David. Thank you very much, Joe. David, you have the right answers on this question, I think.
I wish I did, Douglas, but I wondered right at the end whether you were unconsciously echoing Lloyd Blankfein when he was the global boss of Goldman Sachs, when he rather infamously talked about the banks doing God's work, which I always thought was a very interesting claim that he was making.
I'm not sure Goldman Sachs passes the test, David, of ordinary lives mattering, not least according to some chatter around Goldman Sachs analysts in the last few months.
I fully accept that, Douglas, yes. I agree with you that there has been the pernicious idea, and I think a completely false idea, that the purpose of business is about maximizing shareholder value. And it was the dominant ideology of the bulk of the world's 13,000 plus business schools for several decades, which is why I am particularly attracted by the work that people like Professor Colin Mayer from the Saïd Business School in Oxford, as part of the British Academy's Purpose of the Corporation project, have been doing some thinking about what really should be the purpose of business. And I think their definition has a lot to commend it. When they talk about the purpose of business as being to find profitable solutions to the problems of people and planet, and not to profit from causing harm. And I think that's particularly helpful because it still emphasizes the importance that businesses perfectly reasonably can be generating profits, but it's about how they generate the profits from what activities and how they've gone about those activities. So for me, generating decent returns, not just for owners of a business, but also for other stakeholders, should be the consequence of a well-run business, but it's not its purpose. And we have excellent organizations like Blueprint for Better Business. Here in the UK, we have the global B Corp movement, which are championing what I think is what you are calling for, Douglas, which is a more human approach to business and a more human-centric approach to business. And just down the Strand from St. Martin's in the Field, of course, stands the RSA. And the RSA back in 1990 was host to a very, I think, seminal lecture by Charles Handy, who is one of my great heroes. And in that lecture, Charles asked the question, what is a company for? And he concluded that each company, which of course is a community of people, it's a community of individuals ultimately, Charles concluded that each business should work out for itself what its purpose should be. I personally think that purpose should be inspiring, it should be authentic, it should match what is the lived experience of employees and customers and suppliers and partners and so on. But that it should be also something that is practical to help the business to determine what it is in business to do. I'm actually an optimist by force and by conviction. I think the twin global challenges that we're now facing, the climate crisis. I saw earlier today Joe Biden, in welcoming the world's leaders to this virtual White House conference on the climate emergency, talked about the decisive decade. And alongside the existential environmental challenge, there is, I think, as deep and as parallel a threat to us in terms of hyper-global inequalities. And I think what COVID-19 has thrown up incredibly powerfully is that we weren't it all in this together. Health inequalities really marked out differences in each of our societies and between countries. And I think there is now an opportunity, which perhaps has not happened for several decades, for us to respond to the twin challenges, and business clearly has to be a fundamental part of this. And in order to do that, it's going to require a more human approach to business, a more purposeful approach to business. So I'm with you in spirit, Douglas.
David, thank you. Sam, could we turn to you?
In 1925, Frederick Lewis Donaldson preached a sermon at Westminster Abbey in which he referred to 7 social sins. Mahatma Gandhi adopted this list and published it later the same year. Those sins are wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, knowledge without character, commerce without morality, science without humanity, religion without sacrifice, politics without principle. 100 years later, they've aged pretty well, or badly, depending on your point of view. In my 2019 book, A Future That's Bigger Than the Past, I proposed 8 Beatitudes of Business, which I'm going to share in an amended form with you now. 1. Blessed are those who are needed, for they will find purpose in serving. Setting up a company is an act of humility, because it recognizes that if I'm to survive, let alone flourish, I need the energy and skill of others. There's a great power in saying, I need you. Most people thrive on being needed and are longing to serve if it's in a worthy cause. 2. Blessed are those who are involved, for they will discover joy in teamwork. If we need to carry out a simple task to support an enterprise, we need to be told precisely what expectations are in order that we will not be set up to fail. But if we've had some say in working out what makes a good event, then we feel an entirely different level of engagement, and we share the joy if it goes well. 3. Blessed are those who are noticed, for they will bring forth surprising gifts. Institutions often use the word inclusion, but what really matters is being seen. Being seen means others perceiving our real talents, which may not immediately be closely related to the task we've been hired to fulfill. But every team grows from what must this team achieve to what can only this team achieve. That's the journey from good to great.
Mm.
Blessed are those who are rewarded, for they will create a culture of gratitude. This means paying people healthy wages so their lives become sustainable, just as the organization becomes sustainable. If an institution is about promoting beauty, truth, and goodness externally, then these things must also be present internally. If we each know people have gone the extra mile for us, we're motivated to go the extra mile for others. Blessed are those who are listened to, for they will foster a love of learning. W. Dean Muhammad, leader of the American Society of Muslims, used to say, "We exist for two things, knowledge and mercy. When things go well, we ask one another what was the secret. When they go badly, we say, what would we do differently? If you have the courage to ask someone a question you don't already know the answer to, you're telling that person they matter and that you need them to become a better person yourself." Blessed are those who are given space to grow, for they will find out what they were put on this earth to be. It's always a great question to ask someone, how have you grown in the last year? An organization that just tells people what to do is using them as servants or worse. An organization that's helping people reach their potential is genuinely enjoying them. To grow means to surprise others and yourself. Growth is the reward for giving people space to discover who they really are. Number 7, blessed are those who are challenged, for they will reveal what they're really made of. To be challenged means to be placed in situations where the adrenaline runs faster, because we've never done it before, but also to be held accountable for standards below which we shouldn't fall. When we say bring your A game to work, we're saying if you want to learn, discover, grow, and find purpose, you're not going to do it by taking the easy option. Number 8, blessed are those who are trusted, for they will become leaders themselves. When Christopher Wren walked unrecognized among the craftsmen working on St. Paul's Cathedral, he asked one labourer, "What are you doing?" The workman replied, "I'm cutting stone." Later he asked another the same question, and the man said, "I'm building the house of God." If you're trusted, you come to realize this is yours as much as it is anybody's. You've gone from being an employee to being a leader yourself. When Jesus uttered the Beatitudes, he was saying to his disciples, it's not enough to have faith. You have to make your life and the life of your community a living example of what the Holy Spirit can do. The grave of Christopher Wren lies in the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral. There's no great towering memorial, only these words, if you're searching for his monument, look around. That's the reward for those who create true institutions. Their successors can say, if you're searching for their monument, look around.
Sam, thank you. So, Manisha.
Thank you. So one of the advantages of coming last is to be able to say, I so agree with so much of what has already been said. I wanted to say 3 different things today. The first thing I wanted to say was to make a declaration, which is that I never really fit in the commercial world. To understand that, I had to understand and really think about my own personal history. And so I grew up in India in a very modest family background. And in India, you know, being a woman is it has its complications, as it does everywhere, but certainly there is a cultural context. And business and commerce tends to be male dominated, where decisions are made. They also tend to be family businesses. So you either start off with an existing business or a family sets you up. Corporate businesses tend to be arms of businesses where headquarters are elsewhere. So you're already in the pecking order quite low down. So even if you so-called make it to the top of the wizardry in India, you're likely to be, an Indian arm of Levers or Coca-Cola or etc. or the BBC. And I really struggled with the structures that required me to behave in prescribed ways. And I have always done that. That is my history and my burden. It is also my great blessing. And it brings me to a story, because I've thought about this for so long, and Douglas knows how close his book is to my heart. That, Douglas, in your book, you have an inspirational moment in India. I have an inspirational story about India as well, which is the story about a man who in the 1930s at 16 gave up his family business. He was by then an orphan, but he had many siblings and quite well off, had a successful business, and he gave it up for education. He wanted to learn, and it was not considered to be a useful use of money or time. And he gave it up, and he encountered terrible poverty, lived on the streets, educated himself, made something, worked hard, and became somebody who understood the power of not engaging with power struggles. This was so I learned from him. So this was my father, who was very, very much older than me. I was part of his second family. And when I struggled with my career and my development as a professional and as an individual, one of the things I asked him was how he dealt with it. And his career was interesting because he learned law. He didn't become a corporate lawyer. He became a student activist, and he went from politics to films. He was in the film industry. He used to work as a production manager for a very famous film producer. And he chose not to be, he chose to use law to support and fight people who produced and made and created stories and movies, and not just for entertainment, but for social change. And he supported them because the way he described it, their talent was in the creation and in the change, but they needed support to ensure that people didn't fleece them of the money that was owed to them. So this is a very early introduction to intellectual property and intellectual property rights, and the rights, what Joe was talking about, people who the everyday ordinary people who want to do something and need to be protected by others who have the ability to do it. He loved it. And he chose not to be rich, and he chose not to be corporate in that world, which, as you can imagine, is a very affluent, very, very connected world. And when I asked him why, he told me three things, which I sort of will try to explain. He said, the first one was family. It always mattered to him. He wanted to be part of the family, and he wanted to have, and he said, you can do a lot of business in the world, you can make a lot of money, you can run a lot of things, but at the end of the day, when it comes to that, and if you're fortunate enough to to live a long life and be on your deathbed, I wonder whether you wonder how much time you spent with your family, and did you do the right things, or do you wonder about whether you ought to have done that X deal better? And he taught me that. The other thing he said was the freedom to live your life in a way that matters, which is with honesty and with courage and with intelligence, with the intelligence that you have. And one of the things he objected to about business was the fact that it takes the intelligence of the everyday person for granted, or indeed infantilizes them. And the third thing he said was it was about fulfillment. It was about feeling a contentment at the end of your day. If you spend most of your day working somewhere, what you don't want to do is to come home and find something else to do, because your daily life, the majority of your working hours have not fulfilled your inherent need of humanity. And to me, that's why I always struggled with business, because that was my learning. I assumed that was what you should get from business. And I always thought of, in answer to your question, the third part of it, I always thought, what is the purpose of business? The purpose of business, and I saw that Jane has put the comment in there, or was it Daniel? I'm not sure. It's about what it's not about is about not profiting from doing harm. That's what it's not about. It's not about being bigger than decency and ethics. And it's not about mercilessly exploiting the need that human beings have to provide for people, to provide for their families, to live a decent life, or indeed to protect the planet. It's not about decimating humanity. That's not what the purpose of business is about. And in that lies somewhere the answer for me about what is the human purpose of business then. And I personally believe, and therefore have never really succeeded, that it's about putting the human before the business. And Joe said this very, very much better than I can. And I think that actually, what you asked the question, Douglas, what is it that excites me about this, about the human purpose of business at this juncture in our history? And that's a very specific question. And I will tell you that I feel hopeful, having said that I don't fit. And why? I feel hopeful because I think as a society, and especially I see it in the UK, I feel closer than ever that we can achieve a better perspective about the importance of putting the human being first. And I think it was David who talked about deep inequalities. Yes, but the inequalities I care about, and I started with this, so I will finish with it, is specifically around women and around disadvantaged communities, and about people who engage with businesses because they have to. That is a need. And I think that one of the things that COVID has done, and I hope will do, and Joe, you touched on this again, is around democratizing business. It's about taking away some of those barriers that became very, very self-fulfilling. For example, having worked in a corporate world, it was about power play. What you wore, where your office was, what car did you drive, where is your parking spot, is it closest to the building, how far do you have to walk? It was a thing. It's a thing today that gender pay gaps exist. It's a thing today that if women take maternity leave and wish to work from home or part-time, as Joe said, they're sidelined. They don't count anymore. Their value is seen as halved because they are not physically present. And this has impacted a lot of different sectors. This is media that I know about. This is law, where decisions, how the justice system works. This is about education, and how we refuse to believe that it could be delivered online, and people who couldn't make it and couldn't be present just lost out, and mothers and single parents lost out. And I just think that one of the things that COVID has absolutely done is, whatever else the rationale might be, it is never going to now be said that there is not the technology, or people are not as effective working from home. And therefore we will, if that mindset has to live, it will need to find a new reason to do that. And I think that makes me, that makes me hopeful. And it means that people are now empowered back and feel entitled. And there may be some gain of self-respect and self-esteem and the talent that we lose by, that we have lost in the past, that we might be able to claw back. So I feel hopeful.
Manisha, thank you. So you and so we'll just have a conversation amongst ourselves for a short while, and then Jonathan will take us to, as I've seen, lots of questions and things have been coming in. So David and Manisha, you both, and thank you for doing it, because I think it's quite courageous to do, to lay out a conviction about optimism. I wonder, Joe or Sam, are you optimistic? This is what was David's phrase? A decade, Joe Biden's phrase, decade of decision or decisive decade. Optimistic or pessimistic? Joe, Sam?
Oh, I'm always optimistic. I always, maybe naively so, but I really genuinely do think that we can make the kind of workplaces that we want to work in. And if we're just brave enough to say what it is that we want and to put ourselves out there and to try to create that, I'm optimistic that even if we only get halfway there, it'll be different from where we are today. And so I think there's a lot to be optimistic about.
Shall I follow?
Yeah.
I remember when I used to teach a class in the States in my time over there, one of the questions I used to ask the room was, do you think the world has improved since 1900? And, my answer to that question is it's about the same. So I think making the world a better place is a hubristic aspiration. Doing beautiful things and offering inspiring examples and creating communities of character that make possible social relationships not available elsewhere is a reasonable aspiration, and that's the summit of my aspirations.
I'm going to just put the question to myself and then look to Jonathan.
Douglas, what do you think?
Yeah. So I'm naturally tend to be quite a gloomy, pain in the arse, pessimistic person, despite being a Christian. But one of the journeys for me in writing Elites was to come towards the end to something that actually does make me optimistic, if we can manage the environment long enough for us to, to reap that. And that is, at the end, I use the metaphor of a theatre. The whole book is about trying to unpack what I think is some falling shorts in our understanding about power. And I describe it as a magic show that happens in a theatre. And one of the things that drives the book, picking up something Manisha said about intelligence, that really drove writing the book for me, was I'd had the great privilege of doing this doctorate. I'd had the great privilege of leaving a well-paid job to go and explore and encounter. And with the doctorate, and I over 10 years now, I thought, I really want to try and find a way. I refuse to believe that only very clever people can understand this. I've got to do my best to try and communicate to as broad a group of people what I think the magic show of power is. And I say at the end, actually, if we can all understand the magic show of power, and I believe we can, the theatre is going to have to commission a different production, because the old magic ain't gonna work anymore. Jonathan, could I ask you to take the reins and lead us where questions and things
By all means, there have been some tremendous questions and comments in the chat, and there's no reason why you should stop now. So do keep adding to those. But we're going to pick up on as many of those as we can and give our panel the opportunity to respond to them. So I'm going to start with a question that has been flagged by other people as a particularly important one for our conversation today. It comes from Robert Cotton, and Robert says, is it accurate to say that in the current climate of turbulence, the separation of wizard and muggle crust is increasing? That wizards are increasingly seemingly out of touch, and that credibility is actually now located in local leaders who are guiding communities and businesses that are doing worthwhile work.
Shall I?
Yeah, do. Make a
I think I strongly agree with that. I mean, in a short way, if I try and, my first career was as a Treasury civil servant. If I reflect on what I would consider the state of public leadership in the UK to be today, I would describe it as wizards running amok. When you have a Prime Minister like Boris Johnson, who is clearly a wizard, and I would say a bad one, someone like that used to be checked, could say checks and balances, or have to work in partnership, in conversation, in mutual challenge with at least two Muggle crusts. One was the permanent civil service, which when I was a young civil servant, I'm sure it irritated many politicians, but it was powerful and it was ethical. And the other was within the Conservative Party itself. The Conservative Parliamentary Party had many thoughtful, principled members of parliament, often with knighthoods, whose politics I would not necessarily have completely agreed with, but my goodness, they really did stand for certain things like fiscal responsibility and honesty and some other stuff. And both of those Muggle crusts have been, in my opinion, over the last 20 years, utterly decimated, very weakened. And Greensill just illustrates that shockingly in relation to where the state is. So I think I would agree with Robert that for a number of reasons, and not only in the UK, but particularly in the UK, we have a situation where we have the wizards running amok. They're bringing all their mates, which is what wizards do. And the need to challenge that is very great. I don't know what any of my panel colleagues would like to.
So, Jonathan, if I can jump in there, I don't want to comment on the current caliber of political leadership. As a failed ex-would-be politician myself from many years ago, I would commend an incredibly thoughtful lecture that we had in the Institute of Business Ethics just a few weeks ago, given by Jonathan Evans, Lord Evans of Weardale, the chairman of the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And Jonathan was giving our annual Hugh Kay Memorial Lecture. At least some guests on the webinar this evening may remember Hugh Kay, of course, as a very distinguished religious journalist, broadcaster, quite often on Thought for the Day, like certain other people around this evening as well. Great Thought for the Day this morning, Sam, by the way. And Jonathan Evans' lecture is available either on the Institute of Business Ethics website or on the website of the Committee on Standards in Public Life. So I think that's all I'd like to say on that. But I wanted to try and take a more optimistic interpretation. I meet quite a lot of young people in business, including some remarkable men and women who we give the label to of social intrapreneurs, because they're people working inside some of the largest companies in the world who are taking the initiative, very often without permission. Very often they're doing this in their spare time, in the evenings, weekends, some holiday time and so on. They're taking the initiative to create new value for the business, but also for society by tackling an environmental problem or a social problem. And for everyone who is pessimistic about leadership, some of the top leadership today, and I agree across all the different sectors, we have some poor leadership, we have some good leadership, but I would also encourage anyone feeling a bit pessimistic to look at the League of Entrepreneurs and the examples of young people around the world working inside large businesses who are completely, I think, that they're ignoring a muzzle crust, Douglas, because they're just doing a business in a different way.
Hey, yeah, Manisha, do come in. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I don't know if I should declare that since David mentioned it, that I am a member of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, and I've been a member for 5 years. I just want to address the question that you raised about community leaders and what David just said about young people. So one of the jobs that I do is I chair, as Douglas said, a college of theatre and performance. It's a small specialist institution based in Sidcup. And I suppose one of the joys of doing that is that I meet a lot of young people and very vocal, very articulate people. But it has basically, I suppose, deepened my insight into why, and one of the reasons I feel so hopeful is that there is a change, there is a step change of what younger people, whether you can call them millennials, woke, or any other definition, but basically people young, 2 generations younger than me, but there is a sense that there is a greater ethical, moral compass that they have, which I know that I didn't have when I was their age. And I think there's a greater understanding. Now, we could put that down to a lot of things. We could put it down to the ease of information access, the ease of communication, the ease of social media, the technology, the connectedness. For all of that, the issue is that they, I saw some figures the other day, which I was very impressed by. 84% of students who choose to study higher education don't choose a course based on what they think their salary will be at the end of it. 84%, that's a big number. And the statistics, CBI tells us that there is a greater percentage of people who are not willing to engage with businesses that they think are either unethical or whose principles and values they don't agree with. And we are seeing more of this sort of walking with, your money being put where walking away with your money, as it were. And I think that's promising. I agree. There are some questions on the chat about whether we simply distrust and demonize wizards at the top of very large companies. I'm afraid in a way, yes, we do is the answer. Yes, we do, because they are not all bad people in themselves. But I think that the way these companies were constructed and led historically, and the things that they did, and the power they thought they had, meant that we have lost trust. We have lost confidence. People are not willing to accept at face value just the things they say they do. They want to see it for themselves. There is a sense that we will not just accept the corporate language, the speak, the advertising. We want to know that it's real. And I personally don't think that's a bad thing. And I know that businesses are now looking at impact investing and social investing, because one of the key reasons is not just their customers, but they need to find talent to work for them. And talent is very clear that they are now choosing jobs based on, some ethical match between what they stand for and what companies they work for. They're not prepared to put just earning a salary as the be all and the end all of why they will engage with institutions. So the hopeful thing for me is, and I think more and more companies should ask themselves this question: would people work for us if they had a choice? That's the question. And if that's the question, it's a very good question.
Thank you so much, Manisha. And a part of what you were saying there was about the way in which companies are structured. We have a couple of questions and comments along those lines that I'd like to put to the panel. So Caroline Whitfield has said that in Scotland, some of the ambiguity is resolved using the legal structure of a social enterprise, a community interest company, which has express purpose of serving wider social need and using the profit incentive to that end. And Olivia Dixon has also said, surely the emergence of stakeholder capitalism and sustainable investing, including impact investing, together with the associated regulatory changes led by the EU, holds out tremendous promise for a new play being commissioned. Who would like to pick up this issue of the way in which businesses are structured?
Perhaps I'll jump in with a little something from a regulatory perspective. I think there is a lot of opportunity in those new initiatives. There is a lot of opportunity presenting itself there. But I think at its core, leaders of business have to truly believe in what they're being asked to do. And I take as an example, reporting on gender equality and gender pay. So most organisations are required to do it. And there is a lot said about how hard everyone is working on it, but we can all read those reports and see who is really working hard on it and who has put that at the heart of their business and is actually actively doing things to change the story and do things differently. And I think the same is true of many of these other initiatives. So for me, it comes down to the will and the culture of both the leadership and the organisation to make that change that people want to see and to deliver that change. Now, I remain optimistic that there is enough of a force of pressure to do that. But eventually what will come out of it are those that are paying lip service to the standards that they need to meet and those that are putting them at the heart of their business. And my hope is that those that put it at the heart of their business are the ones that truly succeed in the long term.
Thank you, Douglas. And then David.
So there's a potential negative and quite a lot of positive in the analysis that I offer from elites on this point. So I think it absolutely does matter, and David is an expert on it, on the kind of the difference that the right structures can place. And it obviously is important that actually we feel positive and realize that we can remake the future. We can enshrine different kinds of purpose and we can create new structures where previous ones have let us down. That spirit of activism is crucial to our survival. But my book suggests, if the analysis is right, that in whatever those structures are that we create, those organizations will be concerned about trying to do good in various ways that they have considered and determined. And to just state what may seem the negative, the analysis in my book would suggest that regardless of the structure, within that, natural elites will naturally form around what are the purposes, what are the highest ideals of that. Now I think I want to say that there's nothing to be frightened of about if that is the truth. That's an arrogant thing for me to say, but if it is the truth, it's not a truth to be frightened of. Because actually, if it is the truth, if we name it, then in these new organizations, we can already put things in from early on to avoid falling into some of the hubristic kind of traps that have encrusted some of these older structures, such as, for example, I make the suggestion in relation to FTSE 100 companies that, okay, we're familiar with the idea that in good governance, no one should serve as a director on the board of a company for more than 9 years, or they cease to be independent. But I'm suggesting that actually at the level of, say, FTSE 100, which is a very high level of board and so on, why don't we have a limit that says no individual should serve more than 20 years in total? That's a lot of years on boards like that. Make your contribution, move on. Don't get the idea that because the job of wizard is actually a job. Do it to the best of your ability and move on and create space from others. And so I hope that within the new forms of organization, and they are a source of hope, that they'll just take the opportunity from very early on. There's no need to go down some of the traps that the dinosaur organizations have done.
Thank you, Douglas. And David was going to come in on this one as well, and then we'll move on to another question.
And I wanted to pick up a word that Joe used, because I think it's really crucial here. And Joe talked about culture. And whilst, yes, having a clarity about the purpose of the organization is really fundamental, and I do think it helps if there is an explicit purpose, which is showing how the business aims to profitably meet the needs of people and planet, and not to profit from doing harm. But I think having got the right kind of purpose, an organizational legal form can encourage that. But the critical issue is what really is the culture, which is where, whether it's wizards or Muggle Crust or what have you, becomes a really important part of, but not the totality, because the culture is made up from the way that everyone around here does business and around what are the expectations. And I think that if we get technical for a little bit, in the work that is now going on in terms of consultation around potential further reforms of the corporate governance code and so on, there is an opportunity to become more explicit about what we expect of boards in terms of defining the desired culture of their organization, and then regularly checking to see whether the actual culture of the organization is anything like what is the desired. And that, of course, then puts a huge responsibility on boards and leadership teams to be defining and trying to establish what I would regard as a fairer and therefore more sustainable culture for the future.
Thank you, David. And that comment brings us on to some of the questions about authenticity that people have put in the chat. So essentially, whether the cultures of companies that look as though they're paying attention to the human purpose of business are genuinely and authentically doing so. Daniel says, is there a risk of people playing at being authentic at human business? And David Sims and John Appleby raise questions around the extent to which people are truly being listened to and also acknowledged, and whether consultation, which is now standard, is actually real listening. So would anyone like to come in on this, these questions around authenticity?
I can stop there.
Yeah, and then Sam, I think, after that. Thank you, Jen.
So I think there's a long way to go, actually, in sort of truly embedding authenticity into business. But there are some green shoots out there of it happening. And I think as human beings, we can spot fake a mile off. So whilst you can play at it for a while, it's not a sustainable thing to do. And so I think the challenge for leaders is to open yourself up to being vulnerable, to saying, I am not this all-seeing being who has all of the answers, and you might know better than me. And it's opening yourself up to be vulnerable, to say, I am going to recruit people to sit around me who are technically better than me, who know more than me, who came out of university 20 years after me, and therefore are more up to speed on things, and to not be afraid of that. And that, for me, is the biggest challenge around leadership right now. How do you expose yourself to who you really are and gain genuine followers who care about your purpose as much as you do? So that would be me laying down the gauntlet of the challenge there. I think there's a lot of people who play at authenticity, but you and I all know you can spot a fake a mile off, and so you can judge how authentic they really are.
Sam, were you going to come in on this one?
Just 2 or 3 anecdotes, really. One is my experience is that there's almost no human quality that people will not try to commodify and monetize. So I remember in 2009, I gave a baccalaureate address at American University, which I wanted to call the F word, but they wouldn't have that. So I called it the word we don't mention, and it was about failure. And it was obviously after the 2008 crash and lots of jokes about Obama making speeches and somebody walking off with the podium in the middle of his speech because it had to be sold off to keep the organization going and that kind of thing. And lo and behold, it was kind of flattering, but it was kind of weird. Within a month, I was invited to a symposium where they were talking about, my words, which was very flattering. But they were trying to say, how can we build failure into the curriculum of the business school so that, students can learn how to fail? And I just thought this was beyond parody, really. But it makes the same point. And it also takes me back quite some time to one of these multidisciplinary things I was privileged to be invited to. And we all, towards the end of the event, had to speak for 7 minutes about something we felt passionate about. And so, since that's what I do for a living, I did it. And then the guy that had done the presentation on entrepreneurship came up to me afterwards and again very kindly said, how do you learn to speak like that? And I said, well, it does help to believe in what you're saying. Because he just so obviously didn't. His was an elevator speech. And I guess that's the point Joe's made about transparency. I suppose the last thing I'd say is, and again, this probably sounds arrogant. It's not meant to. Maybe it is arrogant. I don't know, but it's the truth. Which is, I can remember the moment some years ago when I stopped asking people for advice. It was the moment when I realized that 2 things happen when you do that. One is almost everybody assumes your question is how can you grow up and become me. And the second thing that happens, and I didn't want to become them, I just wanted to become a better version of me. And also what I found those conversations exposed me to was finding rather more about the inadequacy of people I'd hitherto looked up to than I really wanted to see. So, I do still ask people for advice, but I don't tend to ask people in these posh jobs for advice anymore. And I guess that's the who are you listening to point that Douglas made earlier.
Thank you, Sam. We'll take one more question and possibly only have time for one response to that before handing back to Douglas. There have been several people raising the issue of the climate emergency in one way or another, and the way in which that should be impacting on this conversation and bringing change to business. Pete Freeman has talked about the concept of a triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit, and reporting on analysis of employee engagement, environmental impact, as well as profitability. Is that a change that needs to be brought in more fully than has been the case so far?
I think that's got David's name on it.
Great, thank you, David.
Thank you, Douglas. So there are already, of course, many different frameworks for reporting, things like the Global Reporting Initiative, SASB, the work of Mark Carney, the former governor of Bank of England, and Michael Bloomberg with their task force on climate related risk for the financial sector, and so on, TFCD. And there's various attempts to try and pull a lot of this together to make it more customer friendly. most of the major companies, KPMG have been doing a 2-yearly survey since 1993, looking at the world's biggest companies in the world's largest economies. And now for the largest companies, at least, reporting in terms of social, environmental and economic impacts is now de facto law. And in some places, it's actual legal requirements, for example, inside the European Union with the non-financial reporting directive. So there already is that. The trouble is, and you only have to have a cursory read of the Financial Times each morning to see that lots of companies are being quite variable in the way that they're reporting. And Joe made reference to this earlier on in relation to gender pay gap reporting and so on. Look at the way in which a lot of companies, although they're legally required to report on modern slavery here in the UK, are doing it in a very, very cursory way. So I think whilst you have all these different reporting frameworks, the critical thing is that the leadership of companies, that's boards and senior management teams and so on, need to understand that these kind of social, environmental and economic issues impact on the business, and they need to take responsibility both for their negative impacts and also for looking to see how they find the new business opportunities, because ultimately I am pro-business. I think business is an incredibly powerful force, which, if it's pointing in the right direction, can be an incredible force of innovation and positivity for the future. But that requires business leaders to see both the need to mitigate their risk, but also to find the real business opportunities in all of this.
Thank you so much, David. So it's back to Douglas now for some closing remarks.
Jonathan, first of all, my guests and panelists, thank you from the bottom of my heart, and to all of you who've taken part, or indeed maybe watching later, and for brilliant questions. I want to give an example of one of the times in recent years when I got most excited about thinking I was seeing a business doing what I'm putting forward as the human purpose of business. I just want to unpack it sufficiently so that the extraordinary and the ordinary elements of that are clear, and then just recall why I've made this suggestion. So I thought about it, and I wanted something definitely from the private sector, from a profit-making business with sort of good, in that sense, for-profit owners. And actually, the example that came to mind was the Financial Times, which for many people is an icon of capitalism. And the Financial Times is obviously a for-profit business, currently owned by Nikkei, a for-profit Japanese media business. And I want to just remind you of January the 23rd, 2018, when the President's Club expose was blown up by the Financial Times. Just to take you back then, they still have a, let's just say, much younger than me journalist, Madison Marriage. And she and another colleague were put by the Financial Times undercover into the Dorchester Hotel for this, what the FT described as a mainstay of London's social calendar for 33 years. An event for men only, a black tie evening, and I'm reading from the FT's account. Thursday's event was attended by 360 figures, wizards, I can assure you, of British business, politics and finance. And the entertainment, I'm reading, and the entertainment included 130 specially hired hostesses. All of the women were told to wear skimpy black outfits with matching underwear and high heels. At an after party, many hostesses, some of them students earning extra cash, were groped, sexually harassed and propositioned. And nobody in their right mind has suggested that this was for some reason in 2018 the only year in which this had happened. And the excitement that I felt when I got the, I mean, there's horrible news, but the excitement I felt when I got the physical copy of the FT and I saw how much of the front page, I think, if I remember right, the whole of the front page, certainly a very large part of the front page, was given to that story. It was an emphatic statement by the Financial Times corporately, as well as the investment in the undercover, and the fact, which was commented on, that the FT, there was then a huge media thing, that the FT allowed Madison and her colleague to do all the answering of the questions, of which there were many, about what had happened. And I thought in there, going back to extraordinary achievement in which ordinary lives matter, you can see, first of all, I think it was an extraordinary achievement, and it got that rotten institution closed down. But you can feel the ambition, which is part of business, of let's be the first. It isn't just a sort of humble service attitude. There's a competitive, wanting to make an extraordinary achievement there, which would have animated the FT. But in what the subject matter was, in how they did it, in the role of relatively or less senior journalists fronting it, and in the way the leadership stood behind giving it, I think, the whole of the front page. I thought it was a really powerful thing of business fulfilling what I suggested its purpose, about creating places of extraordinary achievement in which ordinary lives deeply matter. And just to conclude by saying that the reason why I've offered this formulation as something which might have a contribution to this rich and important discussion is because the core conclusion of the reflections in my book, Elites, are that we have got the relationship between the ordinary and the extraordinary in our lives and in our societies out of kilter. But we can do something about it if we recognize it. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Douglas. Just a few words about HeartEdge before we go. HeartEdge is an international and ecumenical network of churches which are growing compassionate responses to needs whilst developing cultural and commercial activities and their congregational life. We do that particularly through Living God's Future Now, which is our online festival of theology, ideas and practice developed in response to the pandemic and our changing world. We're recognizing that the church is changing and that it's as we improvise and experiment that we can learn and support one another. Our upcoming program has events on hybrid church, housing initiatives, art and scripture, reconciliation initiatives, public health and church engagement, amongst many other themes and topics. And Ben has posted details of some of those events in the chat. Also, working together with Douglas and others, we will continue to explore approaches to business and enterprise as a developing strand within our programming. If you want to keep in touch and receive ideas on commerce, culture, compassion, and congregation on a monthly basis, do sign up to receive our monthly mailer. And again, the link for that has been posted in the chat. Now, I'm sure you, like me, want to offer much thanks to Douglas, Joe, Manisha, David, and Sam for all that they have shared with us tonight. It's been a tremendously rich and thought-provoking conversation. And we look forward to more such in the future. Thank you to each of you for joining us and for all that you contributed with your comments and questions and the discussion that's gone on in the chat. We wish you well in your work, in churches, in companies, in communities across the world, and hope that you will be going back to those contexts equipped, encouraged, and energized. Best wishes to you all. Much thanks to Douglas and our panelists, and thank you for being with us and joining us today.